the animals that have to be sacrificed in the temple, do they all have to be male, or can they be female?
No, it depends on the offering. Some offerings can be either male or female. Some have to be male and some have to be female. Depends on the offering.
And some can be either.
Yes.
Okay, there was one question. And then actually, this one's from left field, and it comes back. Sending away the mother bird. Are you considered to be Kayam that mitzvah if you do not take the eggs?
So I am not a authority on this. I did do it. I did it to the Star K, which is one of the kashrus organizations. They have a guide, a practical guide, which is basically, like one page, to doing the mitzvah. And I did it with somebody here in Northbrook a couple of years ago with their guidance. So in their guidance, what they said was you could pick up the egg and acquire it. And then after you acquired it, you fulfilled the mitzvah. Then you can, you've asked to shoot away the mother bird. You pick up the egg, you acquire it, and then you could put it back. They said that although there is an assumption people have that once the egg smells of human contact, the bird will not nurture it, but they said that this is generally not the case. And so that's what we did. Also, you could do it with, they said you could do it with birds like robins and stuff, because there isn't anybody who directly thinks robins are on the list of forbidden birds. I mean, our custom is to assume that a bird is not kosher unless we have a tradition that it's kosher.
Yeah.
But there are certain birds where they're pretty sure it's not
so it's only applies to kosher birds.
Yeah, so it would only apply to
I never read it.
Bird. Yeah, because I guess because you have to, in theory, be able to eat what you take. In theory, I guess.
Okay, so, but you do have to make some kinyan of the egg. You might put it back, but you do. But what if you haven't made the kinyan? What if I haven't picked it up? Am I kind the mitzvah?
It did not seem like you were, but I like I said, I didn't.
Okay, I was just curious.
But in that thing, they advise you to pick it up to be kona the egg. So I'm assuming they're doing that because you need to, but I don't know. It could be a subject of machlokes. It could be best case scenario that they're telling you to do it. Rabbi Francis, I think, kept the egg. He did it, and I think he kept the egg as a souvenir or something. But when I did it, we just put it back. Put the egg back.
Okay.
We didn't even. I mean, the shooing away of the mother bird happened so quick. I mean, we didn't have to we went towards the nest and just turned towards the bird, and she just took off, and it felt terrible.
Yeah, I would.
She was probably thinking, "Oh no, not this again."
Right. Nah, and then she sees
these
us.
These guys with payers keep coming by and shooing me away.
Picking up the egg. Now I just had a robin's nest under, in a corner of on the outside of my house, where by the time I was really paying attention, there were already chicks inside the little birds inside of the nest. But, anytime we walked on that part of the house, the mother would go off into the trees, but we tried to not, steer wide of it or not to make a threatening gesture. But, so to do the mitzvah, it is one of those mitzvahs that it's a hard one to do. I'm sure the mitzvahs of shechita are also hard to do if you're doing them in person.
I read somewhere that sometimes the father bird nests, will, but usually that is during the night because the father is out getting food during the day. I don't know, but I don't know if that fulfills the mitzvah. It's kind of crazy.
If it's a father bird instead of a mother bird, you mean?
Right. It says the mother bird. Right.
That's the point. Yeah, so I admit that I haven't done a lot of research on it. I did it once, but I didn't do a lot of research on it. Okay. So yesterday I mentioned that we're just going to look for a moment at these two temples, two structures that existed in Egypt. And because our mitzvah is that you have to bring your korbanos in what is called the Beit HaBechira, the chosen house, which would be either the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash. There is permit, or at least there was permit at select times to also bring sacrifices on what are called bamot, which we talked about yesterday. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen again, but that there were periods in history where that was permitted, in between Mishkans, in between the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash. But there are two famous temples that existed in Egypt that come up in discussions in the Gemara. The Temple of Elephantine, ancient papyri found on the Egyptian island of Elephantine, reveal the forgotten story of a Jewish temple that was built there. According to those documents, Jews living in Egypt, when it was still an independent state, built a temple for Hashem at Elephantine. This occurred after the destruction of the first temple, but before the construction of the second temple. Later, when the Persians conquered Egypt, they destroyed most of its temples, but allowed the Jewish temple at Elephantine to remain. Sometimes afterwards, the priest of the Egyptian deity Hnum and the local Persian rulers colluded against the Jewish community at Elephantine, destroying the temple and taking the temple's gold and silver for themselves. The Jewish priests of the Elephantine temple, led by a priest named Yedanya, sent letters appealing to the Persian-appointed Jewish governor of Yehuda and the Kuthian governor of Samaria to intervene on their behalf and lobby the Persians for the restoration of their temple. In these letters, the priests of Elephantine repeatedly mentioned that they wished to resume sacrificing meal offerings, burnt offerings, and incense, which, as we will see, seems to be halachically problematic. It seems that the second temple in Jerusalem had already been built by this time, as the Elephantine priests mention in their letter that they had also written to Yochanan, the Kohen Gadol of Jerusalem, but had not received a reply. The Elephantine temple was eventually rebuilt, but the Jewish community at Elephantine did not last much longer. The academic consensus views the Jews at Elephantine as practitioners of a syncretistic mixture of Judaism and Egyptian/Aramean idolatrous cults. This comes as no surprise because Jeremiah already mentioned that the Jews who remained in Judah after the destruction of the first temple and the subsequent assassination of Gedaliah migrated to Egypt, where they engaged in idol worship. As such, the deviant practices of these wayward Jews does not warrant any attempt at justification. In other words, to sit and try to explain how they are in halachic compliance when it seems from Yirmiyahu that they just weren't. They weren't in halachic compliance. So for us, he's suggesting to try to explain their behavior in some halachic context is not warranted. However, some scholars have called this picture into question. In the ancient Levant, it was standard practice for people to bear personal names that referred to their gods. Such references to deities within a personal name is known as a thephoric element. Accordingly, if the Jewish community at Elephantine were truly syncretistic, then we would expect the Jews of that community to incorporate the name of foreign gods into their personal names. But the evidence shows that they did not, partially because of the lack of idolatrous theophoric elements. Some scholars argue that the Jewish community at Elephantine was not idolatrous, rather they remained wholly devoted to Hashem. These scholars explain away alleged allusions to foreign gods at Elephantine as the assimilation of various pagan religious concepts into their brand of Judaism, as opposed to an outright acceptance of pagan deities. Similarly, the Jews at Elephantine may have used Aramean phraseology to refer to Jewish ideas, but they did not adopt Aramean religion. According to this approach, we must seek out the halachic justification for offering sacrifices at the temple in Elephantine, a practice which seems to defy the Torah's ban on sacrifices outside the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. That's us. That's us. The Torah's ban on sacrifices outside of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Assuming that Elephantine Jews were basically loyal to normative Judaism, how do they justify building a temple complete with sacrifices? As mentioned previously, it seems that those Jews who built the temple at Elephantine only did so after the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem. Based on this, Rabbi Ephraim Dov HaKohen Lapp proposes that they followed a minority halachic opinion, which maintains that when the first temple was destroyed, the site in Jerusalem lost its holy status, thus legitimizing the use of private altars. Accordingly, the temple at Elephantine had the halachic status of a legitimate private altar. As a result of this status, the Jews at Elephantine only offer voluntary votive sacrifices such as meal offerings, burnt offerings, and incense, as opposed to obligatory sacrifices like sin offerings and guilt offerings. This is, in fact, in accordance with the Mishnah that limits the permissible sacrifices at legitimate private altars to exactly such offerings. Nonetheless, the issue that remains unresolved is why the temple was not discontinued or dismantled upon the construction of the second temple. We can possibly resolve this question by comparing the issue of the temple at Elephantine to the issue of private altars in the kingdom of Judah. As evident in the book of Kings, private altars existed in the kingdom of Judah throughout the first temple period. There was no systematic campaign to destroy them until Hezekiah came along. And this begs the question, why did righteous kings of Yehuda, such as Asa and Yehoshaphat, allow those private altars to remain? If sacrifices were only allowed in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, Ramosha Sofer answers that many of the private altars in question were built before the prohibition of private altars came into effect. So there's like a grandfather clause. Therefore, since these private altars were built legitimately, they maintained a certain degree of holiness. Consequently, it was actually forbidden to destroy them, and this prohibition remained in effect even after using them for ritual purposes. So you weren't supposed to use them, but you also weren't supposed to destroy them. For this reason, even the good kings of Judah did not remove the private altars because they felt it was forbidden to destroy them. They weren't supposed to be used anymore because there was a Beit HaMikdash, but they also couldn't be destroyed. Based on this understanding, we can conjecture that a similar approach may have taken hold at the temple in Elephantine. If the temple was originally built at a time when private altars were permitted, because the first temple of Jerusalem has already been destroyed, then perhaps some Jews attached a certain degree of holiness to the temple and refused to dismantle it after the second temple in Jerusalem was built. Nonetheless, even if they were justified in allowing the temple of Elephantine to remain standing, there does not seem to be any justification for continuing to offer sacrifices outside of Jerusalem once the second temple was built. Okay, so this temple in Elephantine is referred to specifically in papyrus scrolls. And did we say anywhere else? It's possibly being referred to by Jeremiah when he just talks about the idolatrous practice of the Jews in Egypt. But it's not there. It's not specifically mentioned. So far, that's how we know about it. I mean, they seem to know about it. quite a bit about it. So it was notes 1 and 2. Just want to see here. The establishment of the Jewish community in Elephantine is uncertain regarding when it happened, although some scholars argued that it predated the destruction of the first temple. Ramosha Leib Haberman challenges this assumption, citing the Elephantine papyri that only reveals the Jewish settlement was there before Cambyses, but the exact time is unknown. Primary sources for the Elephantine Jewish community include B. Porton and A. Yardani's textbook of Aramaic documents from ancient Egypt, volume 1. B. Porton's The Elephantine Papyri in English, 1996. Other sources that discuss the community include M.H. Silverman's The Religion of the Elephantine Jews, A New Approach, and J.M.P. Smith's The Jewish Temple of the Elephantine, and C. Carnet's Cult Statuary in the Judean Temple of Yeb. The Elephantine papyri include texts that mention the name of the goddess Anat Yahu, which some scholars argue was a synchronistic merge of the Canaanite goddess Anat with Hashem, while others argued that it was Holy Aramaean creation. J.M.P. Smith suggests that the founders of the Jewish colony at Elephantine were Jews who fled to Egypt instead of remaining in Babylonian-occupied Judea as called for by Jeremiah. Okay. All right, so there's no Jewish sources. It doesn't seem like there's any Jewish sources that talk about it, as opposed to Chonios, the Temple of Chonio. That does get mentioned. The Mishnah mentions another Jewish temple in Egypt, the house of Chonio, Onias. Chonio was the son of Simon the Just, a righteous Kohen Gadol in the second temple in Jerusalem. Before his death, Shimon the Just said that his son Chonio should succeed him as Kohen Gadol. So we are talking Shimon Atzadik, Simon the Just. I mean, according to legend mentioned in the Gemara, he lives at the time of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great's conquest of Judea, because according to there's that legend where they meet. So let's just see here. So it's somewhere in the 320s, I guess, before the Common Era. So somewhere around there is Shimon HaTzadik. So Shimon HaTzadik is mentioned in Pirkei Avot as one of the last remnants of the men of the Great Assembly. So this would be a son of Shimon HaTzadik. So you're talking about around 300 before the Common Era. The reason I bring this up is because the Christians have somebody they call Simon the Just, who is Peter. And I'm just pointing out that he's about 400 years after the original Shimon HaTzadik. The Talmud offers two Tanaic accounts of how Chonio's temple came about. According to Reb Meir, Chonio's older brother Shimi became jealous that their father chose Chonio to succeed him, so he tricked Chonio into making a mockery of the temple rituals, angry the other Kohanim, Shimi gave Chonio instructions for his inaugural service by telling him that he was expected to wear a leather blouse and a special belt. When Chonio came to the altar wearing these feminine articles of clothing, Shimi insinuated to the other Kohanim that Chonio wore those clothes in order to fulfill a promise to his lover. This raised their ire. They chased him to the Egyptian city of Alexandria, where he established an idolatrous temple. According to that's Reb Meir. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the story unfolds differently. Although Shimon, the tzaddik, advised that his son Chonio should become the next Kohen Gadol, Chonio deferred that honor, allowing his older brother Shimi to be appointed. Nevertheless, Chonio became jealous of his older brother, so he devised a plan to embarrass him and deprive him of his office. Chonio gave Shimi instructions for his inaugural service by telling him he was expected to wear a leather blouse and special belt. When Shimi came to the altar wearing those feminine articles of clothes, Chonio insinuated to the other Kohanim that Shimi wore those clothes in order to fulfill a promise to his lover. When the other Kohanim found out the truth that Chonio had been tricked by Shimi, that Chonio had tricked Shimi by giving him incorrect instructions to the inaugural service, they chased Chonio to Alexandria. In both cases, Chonio ends up in Alexandria. Either he's the butt of the joke or he's the joker when he establishes the temple for Hashem. The Talmud concludes the second account by relating that Chonio justified the establishment of his temple by citing the words of Isaiah. On that day, there will be an altar of Hashem inside the land of Egypt and a single stone altar of Hashem next to its border. Josephus offers a third account of how Chonio's temple was established. After the death of Alexander the Great, Greek holdings in the Middle East were divided between the Seleucids in Syria and the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt. A flashpoint of contention between these two rival kingdoms was the Holy Land. Different groups of Jews took different sides in the conflict. When the Seleucid king, Antiochus Epiphanes, led his army to Jerusalem, he violated the Holy Temple and halted the offerings of daily sacrifices for 3.5 years. Chonio, who was the Kohen Gadol in Jerusalem, was a supporter of the rival Ptolemaic kingdom. When the Seleucids came to Jerusalem, he fled to Egypt. In Egypt, Ptolemy granted Chonio permission to establish a Jewish community in the district of Heliopolis. There, Chonio built a city resembling Jerusalem, along with a temple that resembled the one in Jerusalem. Centuries later, Chonio's temple met its eventual demise at the hands of the Romans. After they destroyed the second holy temple in Jerusalem, the Romans ordered the closure of Chonio's temple in Egypt and eventually its destruction. Josephus seems to attribute noble intentions to Ptolemy. He was said to have sponsored the establishment of a Jewish temple in Egypt so that the Jews would have the opportunity to worship Hashem and would be more willing to help Ptolemy battle the Seleucids. However, in explaining Chonio's rationale for building a temple in Egypt, Josephus reports that Chonio built it in order to compete with the temple in Jerusalem and draw Jews away from worshiping Hashem properly. Chonio had a bone to pick with the Jewish leadership in Jerusalem on account of their rejection of him, which forced him to flee to Egypt. Josephus also reports that Chonio rationalized his building of the temple on foreign soil by citing Isaiah's above-mentioned prophecy. As we've seen above, whether or not Chonio's temple was idolatrous remains a matter of contention. According to Josephus and Rabbi Meir, Chonio sought to worship something other than Hashem. On the other hand, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Chonio's temple was established for the sake of Hashem. If we follow the first view, then there would be no justification for what Chonio did in the establishment of an idolatrous temple in Egypt. However, if he sought to worship Hashem, then from a halachic perspective, there may be two ways of looking at Chonio's temple. Either his temple was a place of forbidden worship, not idolatry, but still forbidden, or it might have been a completely legitimate place of worship. Maimonides follows Rabbi Yehuda's version of events and explains that Chonio's temple was not idolatrous per se, even though it violated the ban on sacrifices outside of the temple in Jerusalem, our mitzvah. In other words, the practices at Chonio's temple reflected an illegitimate way of worshiping Hashem. Maimonides also notes that many local Egyptians, known as Copts, became involved in Chonio's temple and were thus drawn to worship Hashem. The Tosafos disagree with Maimonides' premise that Chonio's temple violated halacha. Instead, they explain that Chonio avoided the prohibition of offering sacrifices outside the temple in Jerusalem by only offering sacrifices belonging to non-Jews. According to this approach, there was nothing technically wrong with Chonio's temple and the services there. Nonetheless, the commentators grapple over reconciling Tosafos' explanation with the opinion of the Tannaic sage Rabbi Yossi, who maintains that the prohibition of offering sacrifices outside of temple even extends to sacrifices of non-Jews. Now, that doesn't mean they're forbidden to do it, but the question is, can Jews bring the offerings from non-Jews outside of the temple? Rabbi Avram Chaim Shor explains that the dispute about whether Chonio's temple was legit or not centers around whether or not one accepts Rabbi Yossi's view. In other words, Meir accepted Rabbi Yossi's view that even a non-Jew sacrifices may only be offered in the Holy Temple. As a result of that, Meir understood that Chonio's temple must have been illegitimate, so he branded the temple idolatrous. In contrast, Rabbi Yehuda rejects Rabbi Yossi's opinion. So he reasoned there could be a halachic justification for Chonio's temple. Because of this, Rabbi Yehuda asserted that Chonio was not idolatrous, but reflected the genuine worship of Hashem, albeit, as the Tosfos explained, specifically for Gentiles. Alternatively, Rav Shor proposes that Rabbi Yossi forbids offering sacrifices of Gentiles outside of the temple in Jerusalem. This prohibition only applies to Jewish priests. Accordingly, Rabbi Yehuda believed that Chonio and the Jewish priests in his temple did not actually participate in the ritual offerings there. Rather, they offered instructions for the attending Gentiles to properly offer sacrifices to Hashem. In this way, no one at Chonio's Jewish Rum temple ever violated the prohibition against offering sacrifices outside of the temple in Jerusalem because they themselves never engaged in such activities. They only helped the Gentiles do so. And so on and so forth. Okay. So the fascinating subject of two temples, two Jewish temples in Egypt, apparently modeled after the Beit HaMikdash, and what they mean and how they could do what they were doing. Right, so that was Mitzvah 84, which said, that is that he commanded us to offer all of the sacrifices in the temple. And that is maybe also saying there you shall bring up your burnt offerings, and there you shall do. So this is the positive mitzvah. There's also going to be some negative commandments against offering. A negative commandment against bringing our offerings outside of there. So, and then we had that you're supposed to bring even if you're in Chutz La'aretz, you're supposed to bring your offerings to Eretz Yisrael. And again, that would mean that even the people in Egypt, if they were responsible to bring sin offerings, would have to do it in Israel. And they pointed out that in that description, and that as far as the Elephantine temple was concerned, they only mentioned incense, whole burnt offerings, or was it whole burnt offerings, incense, and something else, but no sin offerings or guilt offerings. Okay, next, this is Mitzvah 86. That he commanded us to redeem consecrated animals which have developed blemishes, such that it becomes mundane and permissible to slaughter and eat it. So, for instance, a bechor. Let's say you have a firstborn male lamb. So that is a bechor. It is supposed to be given to a Kohen who's going to take it, and it'll be brought as an offering in the Beit HaMikdash, and then eaten by the Kohanim or the Kohen's family. But what happens if you don't give it to a Kohen, but you put it to pasture, and at some point it develops a blemish? So if it develops a blemish before you give it to a Kohen, then you're allowed to keep it. And not only are you allowed to keep it, you're going to be allowed to eat it, but you need to redeem it. This is also going to be true with, I'm pretty sure that is the rule, that you still have to redeem it, the bechor. It's certainly true with other offerings, that if you
How do you redeem with another animal or pay?
Money. No, with money. I'm pretty sure with the bechor you have to do that. I'm not entirely positive with the bechor, but I'm pretty sure. With other offerings, it's for sure the case. If you say, if you dedicate this offer, to be sanctified, and then it gets a blemish, then you redeem it and you can eat it. It becomes mundane and permissible to slaughter and eat it. And that is may he be exalted, saying, but whenever you desire, you may slaughter and eat. And the language of the Sifri is, but whenever you desire is only speaking about consecrated items that were disqualified and are to be redeemed. The laws of this commandment, meaning the redemption of consecrated items, have already been explained in Tractate Bechorot, Truma, and in various places in Chulin, Arachin, and Me'ilah. So, yes, let me just see here for 1 second if there's something to. We have to be careful about this. Redeeming sacrifices brings all sorts of Christian stuff. So here, 1 second. There's somebody outside my house. Hi.
Hello, Father.
Who's here?
Tova.
It's excellent to see you. How are you guys? How are you?
Good, good. How do you know we're here? You heard us?
I heard you.
We didn't want to interrupt.
Okay, I'm on for just, I'm just finishing. I'm on for just a couple minutes. So anyways, the notion of what we call pidyon, we have famously pidyon haben, which we talked about the other day, and that's redeeming a firstborn child. And that goes on money. Now that money itself, once the child is redeemed, the Kohen can use it, I think, for anything they want to use it. There are times when you're redeeming something onto money where the assumption is you're going to use the money for the same thing. So for instance, let's say you redeem the second tithe, Meiser Sheni, onto money. So if you do that, then the understanding is you're going to take that tithe, and then you're going to buy food and eat it in Jerusalem. So although you've redeemed it, which allows you to eat those fruits. So let's say you had baskets of grapes that were supposed to be taken to Jerusalem because they are the second tithe. So they're supposed to be taken to Jerusalem and eating there, but it's not, you're not going that quickly, and it would be a burden to actually schlep the actual grapes with you, so you're allowed to redeem it onto money. But then that money is supposed to be taken in order to eat in Jerusalem. And so the question is, when you redeem these things, what's the expectation that you're going to do with it, with that money? So we're going to look at that. Now, we are unfortunately not going to be able to, I'm not going to be able to meet this next Monday. So our next meeting is going to be Tuesday, if that's okay. So our next meeting again is going to be Tuesday, but I'm going to see both of you guys, Lois and Estelle, tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And I look forward to studying with you guys then. Be well. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Rabbi, is the Tuesday night class recorded? Yes,
it is recorded.
It is? Okay. Yeah. There's a class, a Hadar class, a 5-week class from Hadar about democracy and Judaism, and it's exactly the same time. And
is Rabbi Held, is he going to be doing it?
Yes, nice. Rabbi Held is doing it online.
Okay.
So
very cool. All right, yeah. So it's recorded, and I noticed it goes up pretty quickly on YouTube. It goes up like Swirly knows how to get it, but they go up on YouTube, and there's a channel that has them on YouTube.
Okay.
Classes that they're recorded. This is on too. This one also is recorded. All right, be well, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.